Hello, welcome back to Carry Command 2. Today we're going to be making a little bit more progress with this now series and push ourselves back on track to destroying the Omega. The events of this video take place directly after the last video, so if you haven't watched the first video, I recommend you do that first, otherwise this video won't make much sense. However, with that out of the way, let's resume where we left off. And here we are, where we left off, sailing across the deep sea in order to reach that life-saving set of islands that would grant us much needed supplies. If you recall, last time, all but one of our airborne assets was plunged into the depths of the ocean, leaving us extremely handicapped and in absolutely no condition to fight another carrier. However, it's not all bad news. Sure, our situation right now isn't ideal, however, I did have a plan. Firstly, our current condition. Like I said before, we aren't prepared for a one-on-one fight with the Omega, so we need to prepare. Previously, I located a set of islands that had most of the resources we need to get by. The island of Splinter was our first target. It holds basically none of the resources we desperately need, but it's the first island in this chain, so we don't really have much of a choice but to take it. The second island, however, Tempest, is a completely different story. Tempest holds all the facilities that we needed to create aircraft we currently have blueprints for, such as the Albatross and the Razorbill, but mainly it holds a new blueprint needed to create the Manta. Much like the Albatross, the Manta is an aircraft deployed by the carrier used to take down ground, sea, and air assets. However, a key difference is that it's powered by a jet turbine, making it significantly faster. And with the facilities on the island combined with our incredible net wealth, we can basically print these indefinitely. After we capture both of these islands, we can regroup, resupply, and start taking the rest of the chain. However, in order to do any of that, we have to cross the sea, which proved to bring much more problems than initially expected. Sea, no pun intended. The current between these two groups of islands is incredibly strong, and is effectively siphoning water from the south up into the map. This is an issue because the carrier gets affected by these currents. Normally around islands and other shallow waters, these currents aren't a big enough issue because of the scaling, i.e. waves, winds, and other environmental impacts aren't strong enough to push us around. However, in the deep sea, especially over long distances, these currents can push us far off course. While I was worried about being pushed upwards towards the Omega, another problem silently started to brew, just out of sight. So, Splinter. The first of 5 immediate islands we need to capture. With our now very limited toolbox, this is going to be a rather significant challenge. First off, initial analysis. We can't scan the island with an Albatross because we, Are you fucking? Yeah. So we're going to have to improvise. We can see just from the radar picture that there is a single needlefish guarding it. Not wanting to get too close, I turn into the current and fire a single torpedo, which actually hits and wipes it out. Alrighty, I'm gonna watch this happen. Alrighty. Bruh. Secondly, we can use our knowledge of 2 shield islands that we've previously faced in order to take a rough guess on what's going to be on the island. We know from last time that every 2 shield island has an airfield containing aircraft. This is concerning because we only have 1 aircraft left that is neither particularly fast or agile, so we have to keep a sharp eye on whatever comes out of that airbase. Our main plan of attack was to use our last remaining Razorbill to manually take out the targets on the island. We may be short on aircraft and ground units, but we aren't in any lack of ammo and turrets, so we can afford to load it to the brim with a machine gun turret, 20mm cannon, and an IR missile for heavier ground targets. With that in mind, we deploy the Razorbill and send it towards the island. The razor wheel does its thing, goes in and blows stuff up. However, as we plot a course for it to come back, rearm and refuel, the island launches an albatross, but instead of it going for the bill, it decides that it wants to take a crack at the carrier. Alright, that's coming. Ooh, that's not good. With airspace safely re-dominated, we can safely continue our business and continue to capture Splinter. With the Razorbill back on board, we can move to ground attacks. Unlike the Air Force, we have plenty of ground units to spare. In total of what remains from last video, we have 4 SEALs and 1 Walrus, so we launched 2 SEALs to go and handle the ground situation on the island. However, this process didn't go as smoothly as hoped. You see, due to our improvising and adapting, we failed to take out all units on the island. So the 2 SEALs arrived to capture the point and found a literal army of heavy units waiting for them. Got it. It's my shot. So with our 2 SEALs now firmly destroyed, I sent out the bill again to do some more work so the SEAL can actually get a clear shot to drop off its pods and return back to the carrier. Wow! And with that, we can send the capture SEAL in and capture the island for ourselves. Now that we've got our foot in the door with the island chain, we can afford to take our time. Speaking of time, we were rapidly running out of it. If you can take a guess as to what I'm talking about, good. That's excellent. Because I had no clue. However, doom and gloom aside, we actually had some good news. Firstly, Blatempest was only a 2-shield island, making the process of taking it largely the same as Splinter. Secondly, by taking Blatempest, we could restore our aerial fleet and start taking islands at a much greater pace. So, while we had a moment of grace, I decided the best course of action was to simply stand by the island, replenish our fleet, and work on our naval fleet too. And yes, you did hear me correctly, I did say naval fleet. You see, while there are enemy naval units that come in the form of needlefish and swordfish, we can also have friendly naval units that come in the form of only needlefish. However, for some reason these don't need to be unlocked and can be made right from the warehouse at the start of the game. And they can be made indefinitely. However, this doesn't make them overpowered. While these units are powerful, they're not all made equally. You may have noticed that every single time we encounter a naval unit, they've got some assortment of weapons, like torpedoes, guns, and missiles. This feature isn't included on our vessels, meaning they can only carry one at a time. This, in short, means that we need to be much more careful about which units we use and where. There are some technical difficulties that come with these naval units, but I'm not going to get into them right now, but trust me, we will get into them. For now though, I simply ordered 2 units, the cruise missile needlefish and the gunship. The gunship would simply help us by taking islands faster, but I had a special plan for the missile ship. After about 10 minutes, we got our aerial fleet restocked and our naval units delivered, and we could continue on to our next island. The next island on the list was Treasure. Treasure, unlike the other 2 islands, didn't hold specific resources we needed to survive. Instead, it held blueprints and facilities needed to create logistic barges. This would help us expand our territory even further. You see, while the carrier is powerful, its resources like ammo and bombs are limited in what we can carry. And though we can carry a lot of these resources on board, it would only be a matter of time before the ship ran out if left unattended. That's where the barges come in. The barge acts as a resupply vessel and will deliver whatever is ordered to the carrier. Naturally, we start off with one barge, to move items from the warehouse and surrounding areas to the carrier. However, after a long time and a large amount of expansion between the islands, the distance grows too great and the barge starts to struggle to cover the distance in a reasonable amount of time. A good example of this situation is us. Take a look at the map. Right now we cover two island groups, the left side and the right side, and right in the middle is a deep ocean trench that spans about 60 kilometers. The trench is extremely deep, constantly shoving water up into the rest of the map, conjuring one of the strongest currents in the region. This means that when we place an order from the left island group over to us, the barge has to go pick up the supplies and then travel across this trench. This process takes about half an hour, so we need to seriously consider what resources we need ahead of time. However, a new barge should cut down these delivery times and prevent any potential problems from sneaking up on us. Regardless, we got to the island, and since it was just a little baby one shield island, we had a field day with it. Yeah, we got it. But with treasure taken, we advance. Still, mind you, completely oblivious to that rapidly developing problem. After treasure came Serrano, which just gave us some heavy munitions like missiles and bombs, which would be useful in the long run to take down larger islands with higher shield levels. But now, with Serrano captured, I wanted to focus on the next phase of this plan, mobilization. You see, this is where things get a little bit difficult. In the base game, the islands that are taken by yourself, the enemies, and the Omega are clearly outlined on the map, you being blue, enemies being red, and the Omega being yellow. That's all well and good, but we aren't in the base game. This is a modded game. So all of this data, designed to allow you to see where the Omega actually is, gone. In its place, blank data. This just means that now, instead of us just simply fighting the Omega, the battle is actually a lot more drawn out, and it starts with finding it. This is a lot more difficult than it sounds because there is a lot of ocean to search and very little clues on where it could be. So, with all this information, I made a plan. We would move down south and then east to the strong current that pushed up north. While I didn't know where the Omega actually was, I did know where it started. That, technically, made it its last known location. On our way, I would deploy one of our newly acquired Albatros, equipping it with a radar, extended fuel tanks that would theoretically allow it to stay in the air long enough to spot the Omega. And finally, once we actually found it, we could plan our next moves accordingly. But there was just one small problem. There goes the engine. We are completely out of fuel. Where are we drifting? That's a good question. See, the small, now extremely big problem had been slowly snowballing and finally revealed itself. The fuel. You see, I've made a monumental blunder. From previous experience in other save games, I know that the carrier can last a long time on a single fuel tank, and it should have lasted a lot longer than it has. So how are we nearly completely out of fuel only after a relatively short journey? Well, there's two factors. The first being the conditions. You see, the carrier can last a long amount of time without a top-up under normal conditions, that being steady winds and reasonable seas, but we've just taken it across a large trench with strong currents, ultimately leading us to burn significantly more fuel. The second, and arguably more importantly, were these, the needlefish. You see, these little buggers don't have their own fuel supplies, so when they made the trek from the warehouse all the way over to us, they burned through all of their fuel. When they got here, they began to refuel from the carrier, draining our fuel 3 times as fast. As you can imagine, this was a little bit of an oversight. The main problem here is how we're going to get more, because we happen to run out in the literal furthest place from any barge, and the one fuel port on this side of the map is currently under enemy control. Awesome. Right, with fuel at literally 0% in every barge miles away, what do we do now? Well, we can't move the carrier anywhere under its own power, which basically means until we get more fuel we'll slowly drift across the map. So, we send the needlefish back to Serrano to effectively dock them until needed. However, while we're stuck here, we can divert our full attention to that drone I launched earlier, as it's now rapidly approaching the warehouse. I decided the best course of action here was to trace the island chain down, as logically the Omega would try to expand towards us rather than out to the side. But seeing as we've got some time on our hands, it would be best to address how the Omega actually behaves. In previous play sessions, I was under the impression the Omega was programmed to draw a line through a set of islands that would lead it to us as fast as possible. However, upon doing a little bit more digging, it turns out it's a little bit more complicated. While the Omega has to follow the same rules that we do in regard to the weapons it uses and how it takes islands, its behavior and ability is completely different. To start, the Omega is programmed to follow a time-based conquest system, meaning that instead of capturing islands based on difficulty, it will capture islands regardless of strategic value. From there, it will move on to back cap islands, or whichever one is closest after that. However, the biggest difference is that the Omega has an unlimited logistics. Unlike the player, the Omega doesn't rely on a logistics network to haul cargo around the map. Instead, it possesses the ability to create infinite resources as required, meaning that while we have to capture islands for their resources, it captures islands purely to expand its territory. Along with all this, the Omega possesses a strange form of combat behavior. When within combat range, which is under 15 kilometers of the player, it will launch a large amount of cruise missiles and adopt a skirmishing tactic, which is just rushing in to deal a lot of damage before retreating. Right, so after all of this, we actually did manage to find the Omega before the drone was destroyed, just south of the main island chain where they started from. This is really good, however, it's also really bad. You see, now that we know where the Omega is, we can predict its most likely path based off the previous rules. The bad news is, this is the result. Now normally this would be good news, excluding the fact that we currently have no fuel, no main gun ammo, and are in no form ready for combat. So the only thing we can do now is sit tight and wait for the barge to get our location. It's hard to predict exactly how long the Omega would take to get to our position, but hopefully it won't be here before the barge. About 30 minutes later the barge arrives and starts loading fuel. Finally, after nearly 3 days or just over an hour of real time, we get fuel again. Now that we've got fuel, we could continue with the plan. Judgment was the next course of action. This island had a fuel reserve which would prevent situations like this from happening again. While we travelled up to the island, I printed another barge, so in future if we did run out of fuel again, we would have a barge either side of the trench, meaning we could get vital resources immediately. Judgment was fairly simple to take over, given that it was only a one shield island, so largely went the same as every island beforehand. However, while we were wrapping things up at the end of Judgment, I noticed something a little odd. What was that all about? Well, if you recall, the colours of allied islands are blue, enemy islands are red, and the Omega captured islands are yellow. This means that the path that we predicted just before was correct. Where the Omega was now, however, was completely unknown. However, from predictions, we could either say that it was a fair ways away down the island chain, or much closer than previously expected. And, with the fight with the Omega just on the horizon, the only thing left to do was prepare. Next time.
What's up, y'all?
Thank you for watching. I hope you all enjoyed this one. It was certainly a long time in the making due to the Christmas holidays. The next video shouldn't be too far away, so certainly don't expect a long wait for that one. But, as always, treat yourselves well, and I'll see you next time.